What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review episode 2 of season 4 of Better Call Saul, an episode called Breathe, a title that was quite ominous but became quite relevant at the end of the episode. I'm currently fighting off a pretty vicious cold and have a lot of antibiotics and cough syrup flowing through my system, so if I get a little loopy, I apologize in advance. But speaking of being a little loopy, before I get to my official recap and review, I did want to thank all the people who left comments on my video from last week. I missed a few key details related to the show Breaking Bad, and thankfully there were a lot of hardcore Breaking Bad fanatics who were there to help me pick up the slack and fill in the holes in my memory. I must confess, it has been 5 years since I've seen even one episode of Breaking Bad. I watched it in real time, and while I thoroughly enjoyed it at the time, I was not taking copious notes. And as brilliant as that show might have been, sadly, a lot of my memories of some of the specific details have faded. Some of you have an eye for detail that absolutely blows my mind. Someone pointed out that the brand of tequila in the last episode, Zafiro Añejo, was also featured in Breaking Bad, but I definitely should have recognized Victor when he first appeared, because obviously Victor's going to be a major part of Better Call Saul moving forward. So while on the whole the comments were incredibly useful and incredibly helpful and also incredibly polite and friendly, obviously this is YouTube and there were a few noteworthy exceptions, but as I continue to follow this season of Better Call Saul with these recaps and reviews, definitely keep the notes coming if there's anything glaring from Breaking Bad that I overlook. But as far as tonight's episode is concerned, as I was taking notes on it, as we were getting close to the end of the episode, I caught myself writing this note. I really am ready for something major and impactful to occur, and sure enough, like 30 seconds later, something major and impactful did occur. And it was further evidence that this season of Better Call Saul really seems to be steering into the dark side of the criminal underworld in New Mexico. It's almost as if the direction of the show is a mirror image of Jimmy's personal journey, and now that he's taking a darker path, it makes sense that the show overall would take a darker path as well. And my prediction is that something truly tragic is going to happen, because as we see over the course of this episode, Kim is legitimately concerned about the mental welfare of Jimmy, what kind of influence the suicide of Chuck might be having on Jimmy. But I don't want to put the cart in front of the horse, so let's go through this episode step by step. Before the opening credits, we see that Victor is paying a little visit to Hector Salamanca in the hospital, and as he reports back to Gus, we see that whatever fate awaits Hector, it is going to be one that Gus has decided upon. But after last episode, where we basically saw Jimmy in a state of shock for the majority of the episode, it was great to see Jimmy back on his feet. My biggest takeaway from this episode is that I feel like there is so much we can learn from Jimmy that we can apply to our own lives. And while that might sound a little strange or potentially amoral, I loved watching him in action this episode, how he really just launches himself into the day. He's making orange juice, he's making bacon, he's making coffee, he's all fired up, he's up at the butt crack of dawn, he's got a bunch of interviews in front of him. Most of us at the beginning of a long, hard day face it with sheer dread and kind of stumble around like a zombie until we get run over like a truck. And I really admire just watching Jimmy hurl himself into his first interview, and even after he pretty much nails his first interview, he walks out, pauses, takes a moment, and then walks back into the office and makes an even stronger case as to why his experiences as a lawyer make him an expert salesman. He's always selling a judge, he's always selling his clients. And when he gets the job, he immediately throws it back in their face and calls them a bunch of suckers. And I didn't know whether or not to read that as a scenario where he doesn't want to work for suckers, or if he's just looking at these interviews as an opportunity to test himself and see if he's still got it. Or maybe the job is too reminiscent of his time in the mailroom. But my suspicion is that Jimmy is hungry for action. There's a heightened sense of experience in his day-to-day life as a lawyer. And if Jimmy isn't trying to run a con of some kind of somebody, it's almost like his life has no purpose. And speaking of life having a sense of purpose, we see the aftermath of Mike's investigation into that Madrigal warehouse in the previous episode. Lydia is justifiably bewildered as to why Mike feels compelled to do this actual work when he can just sit home and accept the check. Her point of view is that he's raising the threat of exposure. From his point of view, he's providing the perfect smokescreen, as well as evidence that he actually was performing the job that he's being paid to perform. So in spite of her objections, he says he's going to continue with this masquerade and that he's going to investigate 7 more warehouses. When she complains to Gus, Gus wearily sighs, "Just give him a badge. Problem solved." As we see over the course of the episode, Gus has far bigger fish to fry. He's dealing with Nacho, he's dealing with Arturo, he's dealing with Victor. He calls in a specialist from Johns Hopkins to look after Hector Salamanca, and she encourages everybody in the room to basically speak to Hector as frequently as humanly possible. Once you've had a stroke, those parts of your brain are permanently dead. However, with stimulation and with challenges, your brain can essentially rewire itself or work around the dead tissue in order to resume some level of functionality. But in terms of just pure, raw, human drama, my favorite scene of the episode is when Kim goes into Howard's office, who's currently working his way through Chuck's will, and as we see, he's only left $5,000 for his brother. It's basically just enough money where Jimmy wouldn't have a legal leg to stand on of accusing his brother of leaving him out of the will. And there's this ridiculous suggestion that Jimmy's going to sit on the board of a new scholarship in Chuck's name. And as she rightly points out, it is a scholarship that Chuck never in a million years would have given to Jimmy himself. That basically all this is like a final fuck you to Jimmy from Chuck, including this letter that is for Jimmy's eyes only. And Kim Wexler just fucking lays Howard out. I mean, she is such a powerhouse actress. And I think on one level, she's completely infuriated about how Chuck treated his little brother while he was alive. On the other hand, I feel like it's a little bit fueled by perhaps fear because she's starting to recognize that Jimmy is beginning a metamorphosis. We all know where Jimmy's going to end up. Kim is obviously in the dark, but I think she recognizes that Chuck's death has had a massive impact on him, and who knows where Jimmy might end up. Obviously, she loves him dearly. They have this great date night. They're at home. He brings home all this food. They're talking about movies. Speaking of movies, the people behind the show, Vince Gilligan and all the other writers, they have excellent taste in movies. Kim decides that they should throw down and watch White Heat starring James Cagney as opposed to Jaw 3D. And I 100% agree with that decision. But I love how in each season of Better Call Saul, they're constantly throwing out great movie references, whether it's to like Bob Fosse's All That Jazz in season 1. But we see that the date night ends very well with Kim essentially pouncing on Jimmy and making out on the couch. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I was starting to get a little concerned that we'd be 2 episodes in without anything major happening that really alters the status quo. But my concerns were needless because we see Nacho and Arturo go to a meeting with Victor where they're supposed to pick up 6 keys of cocaine. There are only 5. They have a little confrontation. Nacho pulls out his gun. They basically threaten a shootout. And initially it appears as if they're going to concede and give this 6th key over to Arturo and Nacho. But as they're walking out and Arturo's kind of boasting and bragging about how that's how you get shit done, Gus and Victor and a few other goons come up behind them. They wrap a bag around Arturo's head. They tie up his hands and feet, and they just let him suffocate. Hence the name of the episode, Breathe. Gus makes it very plain to Nacho that while the Salamancas might be totally in the dark about what Nacho did to Hector, Gus does know, and that from this point on, Nacho will be working for Gus. And it was hard not to feel a deep swell of pity for Arturo as he just chokes out in front of his friend Nacho. In any case, it looks like shit is about to go down in a big way. The teaser for the next episode suggested all sorts of chaos and violence and confusion. Jimmy's got some sort of get-rich-quick scheme that he's trying to pitch to Mike. Anytime someone starts talking about free money, especially on a show like this, you know it's going to end disastrously. But I'm just having a blast following the show, guessing where it might go next. It makes me wonder how favorably Breaking Bad might compare if we were to go back and start with Breaking Bad Season 1 and work our way forward. While I remember 5 seasons of absolute television gold, as I mentioned in the beginning, some of those memories are a little vague. And now that I'm so on board with Better Call Saul, I think it'd be interesting to go back and do a proper compare and contrast. But thanks again to all you out there for all the Breaking Bad info after the previous video I did. If you like this reaction review, please consider subscribing to my channel. I promise I'll be much healthier for the next video. And I'll be back at y'all on Wednesday to review the latest episode of Castle Rock. But if you want to talk, you can always help me down on Twitter at Colbrax or leave a comment in the comments below. But more importantly, onwards and upwards.